The procedure of access, Your Honors, we suggest that a provision must be included to the effect that the official or employee who personally received the request must make an initial assessment if the request complies with the requirements of the law. In this manner, the requester will be informed at the outset of the non-compliance and will be given the opportunity to immediately comply with the requirements. This will effectively reduce the waiting time for the processing of the request. Moreover, we recommend that a provision should be included providing that an agency's procedure for access of information must be reflected in the citizens' charter of the agency in accordance with the provisions of the Anti-Red Tape Act of 2007, so that anyone who goes to the agency and wants to access an information should only go to the citizens' charter to know the procedure on how to access that particular information. He need not ask any question from anyone. He can get the information from the charter, which is conspicuously posted in the agency. Your Honor, the inclusion of the community tax certificate in lieu of an identification card may not be advisable. Regarding the sanctions, there is established administrative sanctions, Your Honor, for refusal to perform an official duty or neglect of duty, whether gross or simple. We propose, Your Honor, that a provision be inserted here to the effect that insofar as administrative sanctions for government officials and employees are concerned, it could either be gross neglect of duty or refusal to perform an official duty depending on the circumstances of the case. And the penalties for that, Your Honor, will also depend on the circumstances because it can be dismissal from the service for the first offense or mere suspension depending on how the refusal was made or what were the circumstances that attended the refusal of the government official to give information when required by whoever is requesting it. So that will be all, Your Honor, and I repeat, we have already submitted our position paper on the bill. Thank you very much, Your Honors.
Thank you, Commissioner Ronquillo. When it comes to the penalties, you were saying there are certain administrative sanctions, but it will depend on whatever was committed and the gravity of the situation. But that will depend, that will be different per agency, right? And it will be led too much, it will be up to the discretion of, let's say, the head of the agency.
Well, actually, Your Honor, our rules on administrative penalties are applicable bureaucracy-wide. The factor that should be taken into account will be the circumstances that attended the commission of the act. So, for example, when it comes to the offense of negligence, it can either be gross negligence or simple negligence, depending on how the negligence was committed. So if the circumstances would show that the negligence was gross, then the penalty imposable should be dismissal from the service. And the head of the agency does not even have the discretion to impose a lower penalty because that penalty is provided for by law. He has to impose it as dictated by law.
So right now, those penalties are in place?
Yes, Your Honor, under Executive Order number 292 or the Administrative Code of 1987, which was supported by the revised rules on administrative cases in the civil service promulgated by the Civil Service Commission.
In the past, how many years do you recall if anyone was actually subjected to such an administrative offense?
Well, I could not. I do not have the figures, Your Honor, but when it comes to the offense of neglect of duty, there were already many cases. But if the question is pertaining to the refusal to give the information as required, I cannot think of any as of the moment, Your Honor, because agencies have their own reasons so far at the moment because of the absence of this law to refuse to give the necessary information even when requested by the public.
Thank you, Assistant Commissioner. Let me open the floor if you have any questions. Senator Ejercito or Senator Angara?
what would constitute a negligent duty? Would there be a presumption that it is intentional? For example, if there's a failure to provide information, or if there's a giving of information which is incomplete, in your opinion, like even hypothetically, what would constitute a negligent or a grossly negligent or a simply negligent failure to provide information?
Your Honor, the offense is simply defined as follows, no, by the Supreme Court. There is a duty to perform, and you refuse to do it. So that will consummate the offense. Now, if our law will specify what are the duties being given to a public official or employee whenever there is a request for an information, and he refuses to do that duty, then that will already consummate the offense of either gross neglect or refusal to perform an official duty.
My question was more, Madam Chair, on the difference between negligence and intentional or a malicious performance, because I don't think there's a doubt that we need to punish, because otherwise this law would not have teeth. But if we're going to draw a fine line between what is negligent and what is malicious, where would that line lie?
Your Honor, if the refusal is already malicious, or that the government official or employee is intentionally trying to block or unduly hide a certain anomaly, I think because of that intention, it will not be negligence anymore. That will fall within the definition of misconduct. Because misconduct is intentional violation of existing law, rules, or internal regulations, and therefore if the refusal to give the information is accompanied by malice, then instead of negligence, we can charge him with misconduct. And misconduct can either be grave or simple, again, depending on the circumstances of the case.
When is an offense under civil service rules classified as negligence or gross neglect? What is the dividing point?
Again, it depends on the circumstances of the case. So maybe if the information being requested is a matter very crucial to the requester or to the national interest, and that is refused, then there may be gross neglect of duty. Or maybe if the refusal to give the information is accompanied by maybe by other acts that may also constitute another administrative offense, it may also constitute gross negligence, Your Honor. The problem with the offense of negligence, Your Honor, is that the Supreme Court says it is not an absolute term. It's really dependent on the circumstances of the case. So we have to judge it on a case-to-case basis.
Let me ask our next resource speaker, perhaps anybody else from the government side. Then let me ask Mr. Robbie Alampay for this presentation.
Good morning. Maraming salamat po, Madam Chair, Senator Angara, Senator Ejercito. I'm here also representing the head of news of TV5, Ms. Lucy Cruz Valdez. Let me just read very briefly from the statement, really just as a brief preamble. We've already submitted our statement, but just reading briefly, just to set the preamble, and then we'll get to just a few substantive suggestions. Kapag may sapat at tamang impormasyon si Juan de la Cruz sa mga isyong panlipunan, hindi lamang siya armado sa kaalaman, gaganahan at maiengganyo rin siyang makilahok sa pagpapaunlad ng bayan. These were the words of President Benigno Aquino III in November last year. We have been critical of the President and his allies in the past months for what we perceive to be a perplexing, softening, and sliding stance on FOI. But we are here today in good faith, in genuine hope that for all that is past, and by whatever reasons this has been delayed, we are still and again moving forward surely and this time with clearer urgency. It is obvious to us that it is now obvious to an even greater number of Filipinos what access to information means and can bring. Our institutions are in crisis. From having prosecuted 2 presidents to impeaching a Chief Justice and now exposing anomalies in Congress, Filipinos see that the only thing that can save all our flawed houses in one fell swoop, what can restore confidence in the very proposition of checks and balance, is law. Finding Janet Lim Napoles guilty of plunder will not easily restore the credibility of our legislature nor the executive. Even successfully prosecuting a number of legislators will not quite convince Filipinos of long-lasting change. More meaningful than impeaching the Chief Justice, more stunning than jailing a president, more selfless than giving up your pork barrel, more courageous than stepping out of the ombudsman's way. Nothing will herald a new dawn more clearly than passing a law that tells Filipinos, here is your government, we have nothing to hide. Or maybe we do, but even if we wanted to, there is no way we can hide it. The prevailing dismay among Filipinos is not only about all the sickening information now coming to light, but about the very reminder that information was never accessible to start with. And were it not for relationships going sour, for relatives turning against each other, were it not for the sheer luck of co-conspirators turning against each other, we would still be completely complacent. Not in the dark, for people always knew. We always had an inkling what was going on. Not that we were blind. We could always see. But this is the ultimate danger of lack of access to information. It is the deadened ability to move on despite what we know but cannot prove. We instill in our children the skills of complacency and surrender to the things they hear us condemn and curse and do nothing else about. Lack of access to information engenders a culture of impunity. It reminds us that we are not really the boss of you. I lived in Thailand for 6 years. And Thailand is the first country in Southeast Asia to have an FOI law. I always like sharing this. In Thailand, it was not any anti-corruption drive, nor any sensational prosecution of any government official that brought home the point as to what FOI means. The landmark case that mainstreamed the consciousness for FOI was not even a journalistic enterprise. It was not some investigative report. It was no work of the press. It was the crusade of a mother who, as I think all of us can relate, could not immediately accept nor believe that her daughter had failed to enter and pass a state university exam. She petitioned officials to release the full results of everyone who took the exam, and she found, as many had suspected, and as many had culturally, by culture and by experience, many had accepted that children of more affluent, more influential personalities had, of course, passed and gained entry despite not having a higher grade than her daughter. The point here is that the current environment in our country creates the impression that the clamor for FOI is about wanting evidence and material with which we can go and check on our officials and leaders. The environment creates the impression that it's about media asking for more power. The objective actually is wider, deeper, and more basic than that. What people truly want is to know how their taxes are being spent, how their futures are being shaped, how decisions are being made on any and all matters that impact their lives. We fight for FOI not because hounding you or being hounded is the most enjoyable thing in the world, but because we need citizens who will not only be equipped, but will know how to take care of themselves and therefore look out for each other. Filipinos who will find that where information is fully accessible, citizenship becomes inescapable. We want that gift, we want that power, and we want that burden. And only then will we know that we have woken to a new day in a new nation. One of the things that we think will allow people to participate na mainganyo at gaganahan, as our President said, to take part in this is, and this is one of our suggestions, is to include in the bills some definition not only of accessibility, but also of usability of the data. Without such a definition, we think it might create a very, very big loophole in any law, because it becomes very easy to be simplistic and even to be glib about granting access to information. A lot of the government agencies now do post a lot of information. A lot of LGUs will post PDF files, Word documents, and so on. When we went to the DBM site for the PDAF, and they have a special site now for PDAF releases, one of the most exasperating things was to see that on the front end, on the homepage of the website, it was not necessarily in any format that's easily usable or sortable. It was, it was basically rendered in some HTML format, and you could see the data in front of you. You will have to click through so many websites just to compile all of it again. And when we asked the officials of DBM, our contacts in DBM, why is it formatted this way, they acknowledged that on the back end of that, they did have a very easy, very simple database in Excel format that could have just as easily been uploaded and therefore would have been much, much more easily been usable for sorting. Without that kind of access, what we are getting is not even something where we can drown in. What we're getting is just an avalanche under which we will be buried, and we will not be able to sort or use any of that. I'll use an even more basic example, just in the past week, of how ridiculous and how incomprehensible it can get. There was a lot of public interest, obviously, with the testimony of Ben Hurluy, and people were waiting for the transcripts. People were patient. They understood that it will take 2 or 3 days for it to be uploaded. When finally it was uploaded basically in PDF format, but not only in PDF format. It was basically a printout that was scanned and then uploaded, and then converted into PDF, and then uploaded. Under the draft laws, that would satisfy, I think, uploading a digital file, because it was converted into PDF, on a government website and giving people access. But the reality is, when you're given a transcript that is, I think when I checked, it was, I don't even remember how many pages long. It is not something that's easily usable, you will agree, for any layman, for any people. Most people would want to be able to search that document with a tool as simple as Word, so that they can look for whatever interests them, for whatever angles they think is relevant to their research, and so on. But because it was not even a PDF file rendered directly from Word, but rather from a scan, then you will have to go through a series of processes just to turn it back into Word. And what's perplexing about this is that nowadays we will assume everything starts as a digital file. Everything starts on Word. But the effort to print it out and then to scan it and then to convert it into a PDF that nobody can sort does not make sense. And it is the same principle, I think, when it comes to asking for access to budgets. When it is uploaded into anything other than a spreadsheet with standard nomenclature that can be cross-references between agencies and so on, then it becomes a glib exercise into giving people access to something that is not usable. So that is really the one main thing that we would want to suggest. We have looked at the drafts. We are happy with the progress of the drafts. We are cognizant and mindful of the other concerns that may come up at the House of Representatives and so on. But as far as the Senate bills are concerned and moving forward into the BICAM versions, the usability is something that we think is something that would add a very important dimension to the FOI law.
Thank you, Mr. Alampay. That is very insightful. There are just a few things that we need to be very careful when it comes to defining the terms and the provisions in the FOI. Particularly, I see your point in usability and accessibility, but technology today drastically changes, and it's never stagnant. It always changes. So we need to have the proper wording in such a way that we will enable government agencies to be compliant to the demands of the times also. Another thing is, one of the things that I am advocating is the plain writing bill. And perhaps we can adopt some sort of a provision here that documents should be easily understood. But if you have any suggestion, or anybody here, particularly the civil service also, on how we can have government, the proper agencies, for example, the National Computer Agency or other technological agencies of the government, to help craft some sort of a framework so that we will enable all government offices to be compliant, because it says here that they should be compliant at the latest 3 years after the FOI implementation. But you're right, usability, accessibility. But if today the PDF format is obsolete, and we have a Word format now or whatever format we have now, tomorrow that will be obsolete. So we should have the proper funding also to make it should be part of their institutional budget to have that their capability for FOI assessed all the time. So if you have the proper wording for that, any representative from the government, that will certainly help, because if you're too specific, that can also cause the stunting of the improvement of the system. Do you have any questions, senators, for Mr. Alampay or Professor Carlos?
Yeah, I have some concern arising from the discussion around the table. And this concern is related to my own personal experience, although it has national ramifications too. There was a time when I was doing consultancy on defense and security, and I wrote a memo marked for the eyes of somebody here in regard to a country in our neighbor. And then, so that means it's not supposed to be read by anybody except that particular senator. Later on, the object of that memo contacted me and thanked me for writing that memo. So, well, it's a good thing it was not anything sinister, so it would have threatened my life. But you know, why is it related to FOI? I'd like to be protected also by the FOI. So that you are not able to access something which I have done, which clearly is a memo that is only between me and, yes. So is there somewhere in the bill, Madam Senator, which will govern such kind of situation?
Professor, it's also reassuring to hear that point of view from somebody of your stature, and also for somebody who I assume is in support of the FOI, as you said. But when you think of the greater consideration, I feel that before you write a letter with regards to something public or that will be of interest to the public, to a government official, I think you should protect yourself and ask for some sort of confidentiality agreement first. Because once you do write that, I think that it will be it's better to subject it actually to scrutiny, because if everything will be for the protection of the individual, we always have to weigh the greater good. I feel that the chairman or whoever you're writing to in government should be able to determine if this is something that he can classify as confidential, and if he does, he has to give a reasonable time with which this shall be declassified. But again, it cannot be to cover any wrongful doing or anything to jeopardize the proper implementation of a program of the government. These are clearly stated that you cannot classify something as confidential if it is to cover up something wrong. So that's my personal take, but of course the senators here might have their own opinion on that. Thank you, Professor.
Madam Chair, there's a provision on privacy, no? But this refers to privacy of individuals, like personal information, which would jeopardize security arrangements. But I think in the case of Professor Carlos, maybe, as you said, it's better that the law cannot really protect all types of relationships, no? And that's more of a private relationship, I think, between the one who asked you to provide the memo and yourself. And if you have a contract, I think courts will uphold that has a confidentiality clause. The courts will uphold that. So I think maybe that's already beyond the scope of the law, no? Under existing law naman, as long as you have a confidentiality clause, and most likely you're just the two who are supposed to be party to that information, the courts will uphold that kind of memorandum or contract between the parties.
On a related point, Madam, if I may have a minute, I noticed that among the 10 bills here under consideration, the word information is just used very loosely, and I don't know to what extent somewhere in the definition of terms you will have to disaggregate it, because information can go from, fairly simple information about, how much is this person earning and like that, to, more involved documents. I mentioned this because of what the civil service representative noted in terms of the punitive, the sanction aspects of the bill. Thank you.
Yes, we will note the definition of information, although in our Bill of Rights it says official acts, documents, transactions. So it's really also very broad. Anything that will be of interest to the public, basically, and it will encompass all executive, judiciary, and legislative. But we will look into the definition so that it will also be easily understood. I would like to ask now the representative, the Vice President of GMA 7, Ms. Grace de la Peña, to do a short presentation.
Thank you and good morning, ma'am. To put on the record, GMA is in favor of the passage of a law that will ensure the full exercise of the public right to know. A law that requires disclosure of government transactions, one that clearly outlines the procedure for accessing information, and also, very important, its timely release. One that prescribes remedies in case the request for information is denied, a law that imposes penalties for violations. Let me just add that in our experience, we have encountered some government agencies which are hesitant to share documents with us. There are some who outrightly refuse to do so, but there are also instances when the sense we get is that they are willing to share the information, except that the problem could be manpower. Granting a request would maybe mean pulling out a staff member from his regular tasks to go and look for the document that we're asking for. So maybe some attention could also be given to address such situations. Thank you.
Thank you. I understand that because I was also in an agency before. Our record system in the Philippines is really bad. Our archiving system is deplorable. So this is one reason, this is one particular situation where we will be forced to actually accurately keep documents. As I always mention, when they had to look for a copy of the birth certificate of my dad, which was conveniently lost in the area where it was filed, they found it with the Mormons in the Mormon temple. So the record system in other places is actually more commendable, and we can learn from that. Listen. Thank you, ma'am. For our next presenter, I would like to request Ms. Rowena Paran of ABS-CBN. Bayan mo, ipatrol mo.
Good morning po. I'm here on behalf of Ms. Regina Reyes, the head of the News and Current Affairs of ABS-CBN. We would like to raise 4 points, just very quickly. First, ABS-CBN supports 110% the enactment of a Freedom of Information law. This is very clear in the Philippine Constitution. In fact, since the Constitution was ratified in 1987, the question that should be asked is not why we need an FOI law, but what is taking the legislative so long to pass the FOI law, given that these provisions have been here for over 26 years now. Second point is that ABS-CBN believes the Freedom of Information Act is not just for the media. While it is true that it would, if enacted, help journalists verify information for their news reports, get corroboration, or provide a more complete picture of an issue or event, FOI is, more importantly, for the students who need data for their research, the OFWs who need to access their records back home, the senior citizens who want to trace their pension releases, the farmers whose land titles take ages to process, the housewives who are wondering where their water and electric bills are skyrocketing, soldiers who want to check the inaccuracies in their service records, even the barangay captains whose signatures appear in road projects they have not seen. So to say that FOI is just for the media is a gross distortion. Third point, ABS-CBN believes daang matuwid is not possible without transparency and accountability. Many government officials are saying FOI is not necessary under President Aquino, since the various departments are already uploading documents on their websites. One, not all departments are doing this. A much bigger number have remained close to the public. Two, the levels of compliance vary. In fact, compliance depends on how efficient or inefficient the agency is. Or worse, depends on the whim of the agency officials. Three, most of those uploaded are actually in Greek. We don't understand most of them. And I know this has been pointed out several times, but scams like the alleged pork barrel scam that has rocked the country and several other issues would most likely have been minimized if there's an environment of transparency, which an FOI law would doubtless help forge. Again, FOI is an important pillar of a healthy democracy. It is a defense against corruption, and it will provide a good policy environment for economic development. Lastly, we believe in the right of reply as a principle. It is, in fact, something that is embedded in good journalism practice. This is one of the principles that guide journalists to get the other side of an issue, find corroboration, and if mistakes are made, make the necessary correction. However, to include the right of reply rider in the Freedom of Information Bill, we believe is wrong. One, it is based on the inaccurate premise that the press does not respect the right of reply. It would also legislate what the media ought to publish or air while casting a chilling effect that could dissuade others, the more timid ones, from publishing or airing what should be published or aired. Such a provision would also free public officials, especially the corrupt, and they are legion, of accountability and give them carte blanche to force their lies on the suffering public. Just the last point. We've heard this several times, especially from Malacanang officials. They say, maliit lang daw po ang may gusto ng FOI. Maliit lang yung constituency daw ng FOI. Kapag sinabi nilang maliit lang ang may bilang ng may gusto ng FOI, para nilang sinabi na konti lang yung mga tao na gustong malaman kung saan napupunta yung pera na binabayad nila sa kanilang buwis. Para na rin sinabi na konti lang yung nangangailangan ng dokumento, na walang pumipila maghapon sa mga opisina ng NSO, NSCB, LTO, DFA, etc. na kumukuha ng documents for whatever purpose they need those documents. So ABS-CBN joins our colleagues in other media organizations, the PCIJ, KBP, PPI, and UJP, and friends in various organizations advocating genuine transparency in governance, in urging the members of this committee to please help push the FOI. And also please help us convince the lower house to also move the FOI bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Paranay, we totally agree with you that this is not just for the media. This is for every Filipino. This is to arm them. This is to empower them. So this is actually why we are fighting for this. You have no worries here in the upper house, I think. But yes, we will champion it also in Congress, and I'm confident now that that there's also a growing number of those in Congress that realize the importance of it. But like anything else, anything that's new, we may not be as confident about it if change is there and they're not accustomed to it yet. Let me ask now the representative, our blogger representative, Mr. Tonyo Cruz, to do a brief presentation and the point of view of the social media, perhaps.
Thank you very much, Madam Senator po. If we could only put CCTVs in every nook and cranny of each government office and assign a reality TV camera on each public official, maybe we could lessen corruption and shed light on secrecy. But that is not possible. It is impractical and maybe illegal. The FOI is the next best thing. It gives citizens the flashlight to focus light and the camera to take snapshots of how government operates, spends public funds, and makes transactions, among others. Day to day, though, Filipinos just want to make government work for them. We just want information on how to deal with government. Government has long been compiling information from citizens: income, census, car ownership, home ownership, taxes. It is about time for government to provide information. The passage of FOI is long overdue. Congressman Oscar Orbos filed House Bill 1805 on August 31, 1992. To illustrate the long wait, Senator Po was nursing her firstborn son, 4 months old at that time. Senator Ejercito was a new college graduate. Senator Angara was a business reporter. Senator Enrile already finished his second term as senator. And also in 1992, we almost had a president by the name of Miriam Defensor Santiago. Now is the perfect time for Congress, the next perfect time for Congress, to pass the FOI law. Citizens are taking action over the PDAF scandal and demanding that steps be taken to prevent the scam from happening again. Even President Aquino has said to be agreeing already to make it a priority measure. The internet and social media. It is important to note that the first FOI bill, filed in 1992, antedates the Philippines' first internet connection. We first had the first FOI bill before the Philippines had its first internet connection in March 1994. We are now a nation of 35 million internet-connected citizens with more than 30 million actively using social media channels to network among themselves, linking the Philippines and the world, providing new channels for media and business, and potentially making government more accessible. Our level of internet connectivity and social media access is among the highest in the globe. As early as 2010, the Philippines was proclaimed as the world's social media capital. Of course, it would be better if government, with the help of Congress, roll out a workable plan for 100% internet access in the Philippines or improve internet service quality. But those are different issues altogether. Bloggers and netizens are very much interested in greater transparency and accountability because we are citizens too, and because the internet demands more transparency, more collaboration, more openness, and more freedom. If government wants citizens to like it, and what it does, government must learn to share. The Million People March of August 26, the EDSA Tayo event of September 11, and the Forward March of September 13 are symbolic of the rise and growing influence of the internet and social media. It is not a secret that bloggers and netizens figure prominently in the ongoing anti-pork barrel campaign and movements. You know, Madam Senator, bloggers and netizens are ready to help implement the FOI. and to help raise awareness about the people's right to know. Not only would we ask questions and demand answers, but there is a growing number of professionals who are ready to serve the country in the tasks of systematically digitizing government and public records, set up good and secure websites, make apps, and to make the internet and social media do hard work for transparent and accountable governance. We have seen so much innovation for business and media. With the FOI, we could expect citizens to introduce innovative ideas and executions in the public sectors, coming from the best Filipino developers and experts in technology. We are just waiting, Madam Senator. Many citizens, especially netizens, developers, and technology experts, would be interested in helping government set standards so that information to be disclosed will not just be accessible, but usable. Usable by all government agencies, media watchdogs, and citizens. There are already globally recognized standards for documents, spreadsheets, videos, and photos. We need not reinvent standards. Final points, Madam Senator. Please consider an easier to understand secondary name like the people's right to know for this bill, and to do everything that is possible to make it concise and clear to the common man, to the common citizen. Maybe by dividing the law into 4 distinguishable sections: the right to know, the duty to reply, disclose, and publish, exceptions, and then finally penalties. The bills we have now are not the first ever FOI in the world. There are many countries already that already have FOI laws for so many years now. No country has been put in danger directly because of the FOI law. We already have localized FOI initiatives, including citizen charters. In short, we have a wealth of global and local experience involving FOI. So we should not fear the implementation of the FOI law. Finally, it is expected that President Aquino would push for his own version of the FOI with a list of exceptions longer than the US FOI Act. Exceptions to the right to know should be very limited, very short, and not subject to the moods and whims of any public official, especially the President. Discretion and whim. These are the hallmarks of the PDAF and pork barrel. Discretion and whim should not characterize the disclosure and publication of government and public records, whether mandatory or on demand by citizens. Please put an ironclad, clear-cut provision on the FOI that prevents discretion and whim, that puts discretion and whim on top. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz, for that very insightful presentation. In fact, I like the context of your proposal. It's kind of, when you think about how long it's been taking us to approve this, all of the examples that you made was actually very graphic to us because we could still remember that. But I like your suggestion wherein to be very concise and clear about the different sections of the FOI, to make it clear and understandable, and also to assert that discretion and whim are the two evils, I guess, that we really need to prevent from taking over a meaningful FOI. I will take you up on your offer. If you could suggest names of people who can look into the technological capability of our agencies and how we will be able to comply. Because certainly, I'm sure the government will have to allot a certain budget for that. But if we can get this on a volunteer basis to start with, as we are drafting this working version, that will certainly help. So you will be approached by our secretariat for that information. But I think Senator JV has some questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Mr. Tonyo Cruz. I just want you to know, for the record, because before I ask questions, I'm also one of the authors, and I'm one with the chairperson in pushing for this Freedom of Information Bill in the Senate, as well as even in 15th Congress. I was also supportive of our principal author, Erin Tanyada. But I just want to ask some questions regarding social media. No? There are apprehensions of anti-FOI personalities about the abuse, no, of baka naman daw merong abuse of freedom, no? As you mentioned, there are about 30 million social media users right now. Tama ba? 30 million? 35 million?
35 million, sir.
Oo. Ang apprehension ng iba, paano naman maiiwasan yung abuse and irresponsible use of social media? Ako rin, I'm also active in the use of social media and social networking. No? But these are issues that they have or apprehensions. So siguro para malinawan din tayo and we can include, probably include this in the crafting this bill, yung how can we prevent yung abuse and irresponsible use of social media?
Senator, let's talk first about the rule. So if the FOI is passed, and it would have provisions that government agencies set up websites and other means to provide information to the public. Well, citizens themselves, especially those involved in making websites, would welcome that provision because that would provide a livelihood and employment to them. And of course, citizens actually wouldn't want to go to government agencies as much as possible. We only go to government agencies to obtain permits, seek licenses. So we have very specific objectives when we go to government agencies. And citizens always follow procedures. So in much the same way as other rules or laws, there would be procedures laid down by the law and by the implementing rules of the law. So it would I do not predict that there would be abuse because there would be procedures and processes to be laid out by the agencies when implementing the law. In the United States, actually they have a website for people who wish to make a request for information. It's the same case as in Australia. So that maybe the government could just provide such portals where any citizen in the Philippines or abroad to enable them to make a request for information. I'm sure the process would be if the process would be clear and at the same time would also ask for requisites for every request, we would be able to separate the nuisance requests from the real requests, from the valid requests.
To continue, Madam Chair. Kasi yun lang naman, no? Kasi pag naririnig kong kausap, if they find out that I'm one of those pushing for this measure in this Congress, sinasabi lang nila kasi paano naman yun? Halimbawa, within seconds, di ba, kakalat ka agad yung information. No? For example, paano kung halimbawa malicious? So, how can, for example, hindi naman public official or whoever, one person, how can he defend himself, lalo na kung with the new media right now, kasi pag media talaga, kumbaga may accountability raw sila, mayroong responsibility. So, ito lang naman yung mga apprehensions of those who are anti-FOI. So, can you give us some suggestions or para lang at least alam din natin kung paano natin maisama man lang, no, if we can consider this point so that we can probably add and satisfy those anti-FOI advocates.
Senator, I think the public, whether online or offline, are waiting eagerly for government to make disclosures. And Filipinos are not selfish in giving commendations when we see outstanding work being made by a government official. For example, Secretary Robredo was an outstanding local government official, loved by so many Filipinos. If because of the FOI, we would discover that there are more Robredos around in government, Filipinos would praise them. Right now, there's a shortage in good news coming from government. Good news and information.
But Madam Chair, Tonyo, sorry to kasi hindi naman nagsisell ang good news eh. Di ba? So, these are realities. So, hindi naman sa dinidepensa ko. Don't get me wrong. I'm really for the passage of this bill. But of course, you have to help us also explain to those who are against this, about their apprehensions para naman yung ma-address din natin yung ganito kanilang mga problema.
Senator JB, thank you. I understand what you feel. Perhaps what I'm saying is, actually having been the head of the MTRCB, where we have to regulate also content that's being shown on television, and we don't have also the manpower and the capability to do so 100% because just cable networks, there are too many of them. What we've done is really appeal to the self-regulation commitment of people from the networks. And I know that especially you, Mr. Cruz, I see the way you speak. You're probably respected by your peers, your contemporaries also, and those in your circle. This could be an advocacy, just self-regulation, responsibility, ethical standards. Even if you're just an ordinary citizen, there's like common courtesy also. But of course, basically, it's really expression. So, masakit man pakinggan ng iba kung totoo naman kasi. Yun lang yung ating forum talaga ilabas. Kaya lang, may mga iba din na hindi din naman legitimate. So even if you're not accountable to anyone except yourself because you're a private individual, if you're talking about the reputation also of others, it's just really an appeal for self-regulation. And that's all we can do at this point because nobody can regulate really the internet. It's too vast. It's almost like trying to regulate the solar system almost, with all the information that's going in and out. And with that, let us now, I think it's appropriate now to call Ms. Maria Ressa, who had that beautiful presentation in one of her seminars about the amount of information, more than the Library of Congress per minute or per hour, the volume of information that goes through the internet. So welcome, and please start with your presentation, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. I guess let me start with what everyone has said, which is that we all support the FOI bill. It will, as you've pointed out, require systematic change through all of government. In fact, not just through government, but I think through the way we do business with the government. The realities are there. Essentially, and this comes from having written 2 books using classified documents from the government. We know for a fact that even inside the most secret of agencies, there isn't a centralized database that actually takes it all in. So even if we have an FOI law, what is the system that we can get that in? In the Senate itself, every senator, every case agent keeps their own files. Is there some kind of way to get everything in? So even when you have it, it's still going to be challenging, but it's important to have it because we need to go one step further. And it's this. We're still talking about old systems, old technology. With the game changer that's happening now with technology and big data, we need to go one step further, which is, okay, DBM has data up, but it's not usable. It's the flow of information isn't usable for anyone else. Will we move from PDFs to HTML to CSV files? These are all things that still need to go in, and they don't need to be in the law, but they do need to be in the thought processes and in the paradigms of the people who are going to have to implement it. We've signed several NDA agreements where we've seen the state of IT use and understanding. I think we need to push it up much further because global technology, the technology that's available, can actually provide solutions to many of the huge problems we're trying to solve. Let me go to what I actually prepared for you. Just in summary, the Freedom of Information Law is intended to promote the citizen's right to know what the government is up to. And the whole idea is that openness and transparency will make you more accountable and provide better governance. We've moved to a new level where technology actually pushes this up again. Big data will allow you to see patterns without necessarily even going into granular detail. The FOI bills that exist now accomplish the first goal by explicitly requiring all government agencies, including LGUs and GOCCs, to post information publicly, as well as to supply information upon requests made by citizens. The exceptions, there are some. Information shall not be supplied, such as those involving national security, ongoing police and criminal investigations, and where the right to privacy of individuals are affected. The heads of agencies are empowered to make determinations in cases where the exceptions are being asserted by that agency. The decisions of these heads may be questioned either at the ombudsman or at a trial court. These are 7 suggestions that we have, and we think since Senate Bill 1219 and 217 are basically similar, we focused on 1219. The first is there's a citizenship limitation. The first, why limit it? Why limit the right to information to Philippine citizens? Given that the Philippine government has routine transactions with foreign nationals, including those who invest in, do business, and pay taxes, the need for transparency should not be limited to Filipinos. Besides, foreign research organizations as well as media outlets are at times in a better position and have more experience with FOI requests. The second is the relationship to the Data Privacy Act. The FOI law must clarify and distinguish between FOI requests and those made by individuals under the Data Privacy Act, that's RA 10175. The information that's subject of a DPA request is directed to the individual, while an FOI disclosure is addressed to the public in general. The concern for the privacy of individuals is expressed in Sections 7F and 11, can be clarified by stating that the agency should strike a balance between the right to privacy, as expressed in the case law and the DPA, and public interest. And always that's, I think what you're always trying to balance is that. Where does the right of the individual stop when it fringes on the right of the society? And I think this is something Senator Ejercito brought up. Where do those rights stand? And that's part of, I think, what you can influence in this. The third is presumption. Section 6 creates a presumption in favor of access. Perhaps the language can be strengthened by adding that the person requesting is not required to provide a reason for the request, nor can it be denied for failing to provide a reason, because it just gives too much power to whoever can deny it and the vested interest that may be there. Fourth is the exemption from compliance. Section 10 exempts an agency from complying with an FOI request on the ground that a similar query had just been processed and the reasonable time has not yet passed. The exception is just poorly worded, since the agency is free to interpret the meaning of reasonable time. How do you determine what reasonable time is? If you even look at news agencies, right? It used to be, there was a 24-hour news cycle for print, and that now we're at a minute-per-minute news cycle. So which time? What is reasonable time in this day and age? There appears to be no justification for denying the FOI request. If a request was just made and satisfied by the agency, then responding to the same or similar request should be easier, not more difficult. So there could be less reason to deny the request. The fifth, the appeal process. The bill provides for an appeal process that burdens the head of the agency with the appeal of a denial of an FOI request. Perhaps the denial should be appealable directly to the Court of Appeals, since the head of agency suffers from conflicts of interest, would have conflicts of interest. The head of the agency must choose between what a subordinate did, the decision of a subordinate, and the demand of a private citizen. I don't know if that makes sense. But for example, last night in Zamboanga, we had the Zamboanga chief of police. He comes out, there's a statement by a superior that says he was hostaged. He comes out, are you hostaged or are you not hostaged? He says, it's up to you to decide, because he doesn't want to offend his superior who came out with a statement earlier. So why give the person, a conflict of interest. It's also cultural, I think. You want to take it to another agency. Where am I? Am I in 5? The head of agency. So a more impartial appellate process can help. 6 is criminal liability. If the FOI law will be implemented properly, stricter, if journalists are being slapped with criminal liability for libel, the FOI law will be implemented, should be implemented properly. Stricter criminal liability should be imposed. The current draft just reinforces the revised penal code instead of imposing liability for non-compliance with the actual FOI law itself. And then the last one is, and again, this is very minor, but it goes to the concerns of journalists. Right now, FOI requests it says it's subject to a 15-day waiting period. 15 days in the web, in the time of online news, is a generation. I cannot begin to tell you how the lifespan of the news cycle has changed tremendously. We are and that actually helps determine what citizens want. Right now, we have a very demanding audience in the cyberspace. We are the most engaged globally. This is according to ComScore. We're the largest Facebook market in the world. These are things that shift the power balance. So for us, 15 days, a 15-day waiting period is a lifetime. There are reasons to put it in place, but we would like to submit that perhaps news organizations, journalists, not be subjected to the 15-day waiting period. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Maria Ressa. I will ask for a copy of your 8 points. With regards to the 15-day waiting period, that's why there are also suggestions that documents should be uploaded immediately, so that if something random or something is asked that's already uploaded, they can say, please go to our website. But it doesn't also prevent journalists from ambush interviewing government officials to get an initial statement. But sometimes things have to, you also have to be very diligent and prudent also putting things together so that you don't have any unfair representation also. Do you have any questions, Senator Angara? Or
just on the very good points, and I think it will improve the bill if we input a lot of those points. But on the appellate point, I think that was point 4 or point 5, you suggested that upon denial, I think, is this the suggestion, Madam Chair, that upon denial by the person to whom the request was directed, the appeal is already made to a separate agency? Was that the suggestion?
Yeah, that's her suggestion.
Because I think most of the bills provide for the first line of appeal is to the head of the agency, because it's to give the head of the agency. It's kind of in line with the legal principle of exhaustion of administrative remedies. You give the head of the agency the chance to correct a mistake or an action taken by his subordinate. So that's just something I wanted to put out there.
Sir, I think that's correct. I mean, we were just trying to point out that that there could be a conflict of interest, but it's just a suggestion.
No, but you're right, because if you're trying to regulate yourself, you also need checks and balances. It's just a matter of the timing, maybe 15 days, but after 15 days, the head of the agency will have to respond, and then after which you can take it either to the regular courts or the ombudsman, who is tasked to have an FOI desk. So we can look at the time frame. Perhaps the head of the agency won't be given 15 days anymore, since the first initial 15 days was already there, maybe 3 days or so. But again, we have to study that in our working draft.
Actually, Madam Chair, under some of the bills, there is the option on the request, the one requesting information. He can choose to appeal it to the head of the agency, or he can go straight to the ombudsman, actually.
Okay. Thank you for that, Senator Angara. Senator, let me now request the representative of the ombudsman, Mr. Gerald Mosquera, to do the presentation for for your agency?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Your Honors, Senators Ercito and Senator Angara. In compliance with your request, Madam Chair, the Office of the Ombudsman is presently finalizing a set of comments on the various bills presented to the committee. And we are planning to submit it with the indulgence of the Honorable Chair by September 25, Wednesday next week. This will embody all the comments of the Office of the Ombudsman.
May we ask for it to be submitted earlier, perhaps in a concise form, just the salient points, like what Ms. Reza and Mr. Cruz pointed out. Certain points like penalties,
Yes.
Exclusions, national security matters, or whatever. It'll be easier.
Yes, Madam Chair. I think we can do so within the week, Madam Chair.
It would be much appreciated.
Yes, we actually have a copy here, but it is going through the process of review in our office.
No, all 11 versions, right? But
Yes.
but there's a lot of similar provisions also that you can
Sure. Yes,
go
Madam
through.
Chair. And if I may be allowed to
Please, sir.
express the position of the office, Madam Chair. The mandate of the Office of the Ombudsman is to promote full transparency, real and effective accountability, and to fight corruption. This was expressed in 1987, but by who we consider as the father of the Office of the Ombudsman, the father of the Honorable Senator Angara. Senator Angara, when he sponsored the bill creating the Office of the Ombudsman before the Senate in 1987. So any initiative, particularly the initiative of this committee, that would place information in the hands of our citizens and empower them to not only watch their government, but also actually use that information and demand good governance, will actually help the Office of the Ombudsman perform its mandate. So we are very supportive of the initiative of the Senate as well as the House of Representatives and civil society to promote the passage of the Freedom of Information the bill. Of course, we also understand upon our review of the various bills presented to the committee that there are relevant and valid concerns raised that any Freedom of Information bill must ensure that national security and public safety will and should not be prejudiced, that the capacity of the government to enforce its laws should not be compromised, and that the various functions of government, particularly investigative, prosecutorial, and judicial, should not be affected. If I may be allowed, Madam Chair, to just point out certain portions of the draft bills, flagged certain portions of it. And if I may take off from what Senator Ercito mentioned regarding the possible abuse of rights, I think that's a very legitimate and valid concern. As with all rights, the right of information can be abused. In fact, that has been, it's a recognized principle in law that the fact that you have a right is no license to abuse that right. And as pointed out by Madam, my colleague, my seatmate here, when you have that right or that information, that is no license for you to use it in whatever way you want. There are reputations that have been built over the years that could be destroyed. So in that regard, if I may just share our experience in the Office of the Ombudsman, under the leadership of the Honorable Ombudsman now, we have created a system where we readily give access to the SALNs that are in our possession. In fact, I think now any member of the media, the academe, can come to us and can get the SALNs of any the government officials that are depositing their SALNs with us within the hour that they can wait. But we have also had actual experience where those SALNs have been used to harass government officials. And that is something that we would suggest that the eventual law that would be passed should also address. For example, is there a provision that would regulate use of the information actually acquired. So while there is a grant of a right to access to those information, I think the use of that information should also be treated in the law. And just on a final point, Madam Chair, the Ombudsman has been repeatedly mentioned in the draft bills that have been submitted to the committee for consideration. And I would like to take off, Madam Chair, from what you mentioned, I heard earlier, when you posed the question that are our government agencies ready for a full freedom of information regime? For example, the Ombudsman is currently, of course, under his present manpower complement, is struggling to cope with the increased number of complaints that have been submitted to us, not only because of the volume that has been there, but also because of the increased credibility of the office. Under the leadership of Ombudsman Conchita Carpio Morales, we have received a deluge of complaints. If the Ombudsman will be designated by law as the appeal body or the first stop for complaints, it will require the Office of the Ombudsman to, for example, as pointed out by the Honorable Chair, put up a FOI desk. That's doable within the short frame. But I would just like to share with the committee that the Ombudsman is not a fully regionalized agency. We only have, we have a main office in Quezon City, one in Cebu, and one in Davao. We have smaller regional office in Tacloban, Iloilo, and Cagayan, but we are not in the other areas. That's why one thing to consider by the committee is the proposal by Senator Osmeña, because Senator Osmeña's proposal is for the courts to be the appeal body. That may also be considered by the committee, because if we are to have a full freedom of information regime, we may want to give everybody full access. And if I may just quickly take off from what Senator Angara mentioned, because under the proposed draft bills, I think most of the proposed draft bills propose the Ombudsman as the first level of appeal. In fact, there is an option. Rather than appealing to the head of the agency, you can go directly to the Ombudsman. Our suggestion, and as pointed out by Senator Angara, we support the principle of exhaustion of administrative remedies. We should first give the agency a chance to correct whatever a lower ranked official may have done. For example, if there was a denial at the first level, the agency should be given a chance to look at that denial before it goes to the Ombudsman. It will also lessen the burden on the Office of the Ombudsman. And finally, Madam Chair, the point that the Ombudsman is to be designated as the body, we think it is appropriate because under Republic Act 6770, the Ombudsman law, the Ombudsman is empowered to direct any public official to perform an act required by law. So if a certain public official, for example, has the duty to provide certain information, certain documents, and refuses to do so without valid basis, then it should be the Ombudsman. Even under existing law, that should be the body that will enforce that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir. You're right about the apprehensions with the deluge of requests, especially if you have an FOI responsibility now. The desk is certainly one of the things that's part of the provision, but also they can go directly to the courts. So the regional concern is also addressed there, but I see your point that we need to stress it very clearly that they can also go directly to the courts and not just to the Ombudsman. The senators will agree. Let us have our last resource speaker, and if we have any time left for more questions. From the representative of the National Union of Philippine Journalists, Mr. Alwin Alburo. Welcome, sir.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Senator Sangara, Senator Ejercito, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate. On behalf of my fellow officers, my chairperson, Weng Paraan, and members of the National Union of Journalists of the Philippines, thank you for the opportunity to address the Senate Committee on Public Information. The purpose of journalism is to provide the people, the public, with the information they need to be free and self-governing. In the indirect initiative, it has been stated, access to information held by government is important to the exercise of the people's right to effective and reasonable participation at all levels of social, political, and economic decision-making. Thus, the right to information are enshrined among other basic rights within the Constitution. So journalism's purpose is no surprise, since as journalists, our loyalty is to the public, the man, the woman in the streets, the poor. As the fourth estate, we monitor those who are in power. And as a representative of the working journalist, we know how it feels to be at the receiving end of belligerent record-keeping government officials who most of the times test our patience when we access records for our news stories. The 15-day waiting periods alone are enough to kill a story or bury it in oblivion in the current news cycle, considering that every week we have news that erupts and takes away the focus of journalists. Sometimes when those in power are remiss or who have been remiss in their duties, we report their conduct, such as what has happened in the pork barrel scam, where ordinary citizens from all walks of life have signified their disgust on how some elected officials have squandered and misused government money. But most of the elected legislators implicated in the pork barrel scam do not even want to reply, even when asked by journalists their side. That's why the NUJP is against the right of reply in whatever form, be it a rider in the FOI bill or a bill of its own entirety. It is unconstitutional as it infringes on the freedom of the press. It is redundant as it's already being practiced by the journalism principle of fairness. We ask the other side before we publish a story. There are several functioning mechanisms employed by journalist organizations as well as journalist groups as recourse of politicians and other people harmed or afflicted by media, real or imagined. In a world of fast-evolving technologies and with the proliferation of social media, pointing out errors of media and correcting them through these self-regulating mechanisms are already par for the course for any self-respecting media organization. Sadly, there are others in our land who not only do not want to reply anymore to issues raised by media, instead they kill directly the messengers of news, and kill they've had so much so that there is now a culture of impunity with these killings. 157 journalists to date have died since 1986. 17 alone have died during the Aquino administration. 3 weeks ago, the two latest killings happened within a span of a week. And we must not forget the Ampatuan or the Maguindanao massacre, that infamous incident which is arguably a byproduct of an FOI-less reality, patronage politics, warlordism, private armies, graft and corruption, non-transparency, of which nothing has changed. The Maguindanao massacre has since become the poster boy for impunity, earning the sad distinction worldwide for the country as the International Day to End Impunity Worldwide. It is now reaching its 4th year in 2 months, and the wheels of justice are still moving at a glacial pace, while the victims' families continue to suffer. And so it is a costly thing to live in this present darkness without an FOI. This is not about media wanting more power. This is about ordinary people who can access genuine information which they can use to live free, meaningful, and enlightened lives. And so along with our colleagues in the Freedom Fund for Filipino Journalists, the PCIJ, CMFR, PPI, KBP, CCJD, and the different media organizations, and the Right to Know Right Now coalition of which we are a member, the NUJP supports the indirect initiative of the FOI, and we hope that the Senate will adopt and pass it as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alburo, for your statement. Together with the other organizations that comprise the National Union of Journalists of the Philippines. Any more questions, Senators, before we turn over the plenary to the Commission on Appointments?
Just a point. I was told that some websites of government are unable to handle certain large number of requests and actually crash. So I think that's something that we have to ensure also. It is related to the usability of information that was raised by the various resource persons. And maybe we could also, because I think it was raised at one of the Rappler a forum or fora that by 2015 or 2016, it's 99% internet connectivity. So that's something that we really should be looking into, availability, given what from the Office of the Ombudsman, Deputy Ombudsman Mosquera mentioned that that the Ombudsman is not a nationwide, and I foresee that the Ombudsman will be inundated with thousands of requests once this is enacted into law. I think that's the budgetary implication should also be looked into, Madam Chair.
Mr. Alambay?
Yes. If I may suggest, but it's not a very concrete suggestion, but it's just worth thinking about that in defining publication and in defining granting access to the public, we may as well consider the array of resources and services already being offered by media. And if we were to consider that giving media access to documents and records and so on the assumption and on the given that media will also be uploading all of these on their sites, it may be worth thinking about whether or not that satisfies a certain definition of publication and granting access. One thing, it's not necessarily related to documents and so on, but one thing we've done, for example, is we've worked with MMDA to create an online traffic monitoring system. All of that is hosted on private servers. And yet, under our agreement, all of the data belongs to the public. It may be a service that we may be able it's a public service that obviously we are all here in this room that we all would like to serve and to give. I'll give another example. I forget which agency. I was having a discussion years ago with NEPO Malaluan about a set of data all compiled in a number of CDs. I think it was NSO or something. And the cost for getting the data was something like 12,000 pesos. And supposedly this is justified in the sense that it's to recover the cost of the production of that. I won't even get into the question of the cost. That's fine. No? If it's 12,000 pesos for 10 CDs worth of NSO data, that's fine. But the curious thing also was that part of the purchase, as I was made to understand, was part of the terms was that you could not publish that. You could not upload it on your own. And it's a very curious question. Why shouldn't I be able to do this favor for the government and for the public? If at the cost of 12,000 pesos, I can put it on my server and make it accessible to all Filipinos forever, then something went wrong in our relationship between media and government. I think this question may be an opportunity for us to precisely rethink our partnership in this task of not just passing a law, but making it viable and making it real.
Understand. And in fact, we note your work with the MMDA, and this is certainly a good partnership that benefits the public. Perhaps you could clear with your bosses if you're willing to provide the technology for free for us to be able to upload all of this information of the government in our own websites. But certainly, this is something that you can help us with, the media. Ms. Rasa?
Ma'am, just to say how fast things will change, Senator Angara talked about 99% internet penetration rate. But DOST Secretary Mario Montejo is the man who said this on the record. He said that he expects we will hit 99% internet penetration rate by 2015 because DOST right now is working on looking at TV white space, which means essentially wherever there's a TV signal, it can carry access to the internet. And when we looked into this, we actually saw that Microsoft is working with DOST on it. They've had some successes already. They're already testing it. If that does happen, when Secretary Montejo first said he would get Project NOAA up in 6 months, I kind of poo-pooed it. Because I was like, how can you get that up that fast? But look now. So I'm listening to him more closely after he said that He said it on the record. We have him on camera, and I want to hold him accountable for that. 99% internet penetration rate will change everything.
Yes, the TV will now be the computer. Yes, Right to Know Right Now Coalition.
Just very quickly on the matter of the ombudsman as also providing a review or appellate mechanism. I think the history of looking into the ombudsman is because of the inaccessibility also of direct recourse to the court, and that was why it was also made alternative with respect to whether the citizen would choose to go directly to the court or go for an intermediate body with less technical requirements as the courts would have. But the other alternative to that in the past was the creation of an information commission, but which Congress was not amenable to putting up. And so it had to look for a viable agency, and the one with the current constitutional power to direct agencies to perform an act happened to be the Office of the Ombudsman. So that was part of the context of that.
Yes, well noted, sir. In fact, I think in Mexico they have an information agency that really oversees all of this, and that's the reason for their success, apparently. But with the latest versions that we received, the process really is through the ombudsman and also the regular courts. But did somebody raise their hands before I do the closing? Mr. Cruz, short, just a brief remark, please, because we need to turn over the call.
Going back to Senator Hercito's questions regarding social media used by government officials and agencies, maybe, number one, it's about time for agencies and officials to adopt ground rules on how they intend to use it. Is it part of official records? Is it part of the conduct of their work? Who handles these accounts? For what purpose? Could we officially ask you for information on Twitter? It would start from there. Up to now, no government agency in this country has unveiled social media guidelines for its own use, not for the public. That's totally different. In the United States, in most other major countries that use that has governments using social media, the State Department, the Foreign Commonwealth Office of the UK, they have social media guidelines, which people read and, okay, the Foreign Secretary could do this on social media. That's number one. The Office of the President promised to have social media guidelines for the Office of the President, but this has yet to be shared with the public. And number two, Madam Chair, last 2010 or 2011, the government unveiled its Philippine digital strategy. I was there. It was a very exciting time. It was held at a hotel. So the government already has a roadmap. It was unveiled by the CICT. But unfortunately, Madam Chair, the following day or on the same day, the President abolished the CICT. So we do not know. Well, that roadmap or that strategy has one component: transparency in governance. So that could answer, for example, questions about the readiness of government to leverage internet and social for disclosing information to the public. So it's a valid question because those who oppose the FOI say that the government is not ready, but that's not the citizens' fault. The government already has a strategy 3 years ago. So maybe we could ask the Office of the President or the DOST, what's the status of the Philippine Digital Strategy, 2011 to 2016?
Okay.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cruz. Do you have any additional questions, sir? I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Executive Director Ariel Cebellino, the Press Institute. Thank you, sir, for being here. Who else didn't have the chance to speak? Executive Director Vincent Lasatin was here last time, and we gave him a chance also. So as I close today's hearing, let me request everybody to please submit your position statements that would be relevant, as the committee will submit its report by September 23. Particularly, I would like to make that special appeal to the Ombudsman, even just a very concise submission. The committee report will be by September 25, Wednesday next week. So let me express your committee's appreciation, of course, to all the guests here, the initial champion of FOI, one of the champions of FOI in the lower house, in particular, Congressman Tañada, thank you. Everybody from the Ombudsman and the different networks that are here today, even online, our online representatives. Thank you also for being here. And one of the things that I gather from our discussion is really the capability of the government to provide that information. Are we technologically ready to give that information? And you're right, we need to ask what happened to the CICT and the digital convention that you had. I think they're now absorbed by the DOST, but there are other subgroups in the DOST that is actually tasked to keep the government records compliant through its web uploading. So these are the things that we will look into as we do the working draft. So again, I am now adjourning our meeting today, and thank you so much for your time.